Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the WWF Virtual Insider Series event. My name is Andrew Wiley, and I'm honored to have been working on behalf of our partners in conservation community for the past 11 years. In a couple minutes, I'll introduce Dr. Meg Symington, WWF's Managing Director for the Amazon, who will talk to us today about her work to help protect this critically important region. But before I turn things over to Meg, I want to point out a few things about today's virtual event. We will have time for questions following the presentation. If you have a question you'd like to ask Meg, please use the Google form below the video player in your web browser. Our team behind the scenes will be monitoring your submissions throughout the presentation, and we'll try to answer as many questions during the Q&A portion of today's event as possible. If you'd like to maximize the size of your video screen, float your mouse over the video player and click the expand icon at the far right of the toolbar on the bottom. To exit out of full screen mode, which you may want to do to submit a question, you can minimize your video by pressing the escape button on your keyboard. We also want to note that today's event is being recorded so it can be shared on the WWF website. And finally, following today's presentation, we have a special information session about a November 2021 trip to the Peruvian Amazon. We invite anyone interested in learning more about this opportunity to travel with WWF experts, including Meg and Kurt Hole, Country Director for WWF Peru, to stay on with us. During the session, Court Whalen from Natural Habitat Adventures will discuss the itinerary and the beautiful riverboat, as well as the activities and wildlife we will encounter along the way. And you will have the opportunity to get any questions you have answered. So now let's get into today's topic. Spanning an area twice the size of India, the Amazon is virtually unrivaled in scale, complexity, and opportunity, and is truly a region unlike any other on our planet. WWF has played a vital role in protecting the Amazon for more than 40 years. From our initial site-based research projects in the 1960s, WWF has, over the years, expanded our work to include groundbreaking efforts to safeguard this critical ecosystem. Confronting drivers of deforestation, protecting species, collaborating with governments to create and manage protected areas, and working with agriculture and timber sectors to develop a sustainable forest economy. Most importantly, we engage with local communities and partner with governments to identify solutions that bridge the needs of economic development and conservation. Central to our work in the region over the last 30 years has been Dr. Meg Symington, who we are so happy to have with us today. Meg's passion for conserving the Amazon goes back to the 27 months she spent there while earning her PhD, when she carried out the first long-term field study of the black spider monkey in the Peruvian Amazon. Her experience spans conservation and natural resource management for projects for the forest and freshwater ecosystems in most countries across Latin America. Meg, we are so looking forward to hearing from you.
Great. Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. It's great to be here. So I'm going to start out by giving you an overview of the Amazon, its importance in the global context, and a small taste of the diversity of species its forests and rivers are home to. And then I'll talk about some exciting work WWF has been a part of that's showing real success. And I'll end with some of the current challenges and what I think needs to be done to ensure the continued integrity of the Amazon, its ecosystems, and its inhabitants for the future. And then we'll have some time for questions. So first off, the scope and scale of the Amazon are truly amazing. 40% of the world's remaining rainforest is found here. It's about the size of the continental US, about 3 million square miles, and at least 10% of the world's known species are in this region, maybe as many as 30% once they're all counted. In a WWF report from a few years ago, we documented the discovery of 1,200 new species in the Amazon over the last 10 years. That's one new species every 3 days. The Amazon forest is so large, it influences global and regional climate. These dense forests pull greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and store them as carbon, thus slowing the rate of global warming. And they also play a powerful role in the water cycle, creating clouds that make weather around the world and bringing rainfall to South America's breadbasket, and even influencing rainfall as far away as the Midwest of the US. So there's at least 3 different Amazons. There's the basin, the biome, and the socio-political Amazon. So the Amazon basin, which is shown here, surrounded by the blue line, is all of the rivers that drain into the Amazon watershed. The Amazon biome, which is shown in green here, is the contiguous forest, and they don't overlap exactly. When WWF talks about the Amazon, we're mostly talking about the biome, the area of contiguous Amazon forest. But of course, the Amazon exists in a socio-political context as well. There are 8 countries that make up the basin, as you can see here, plus the French overseas territory of French Guiana. And there is an international treaty, the Amazon Cooperation Treaty, that unites all of the countries of the basin except for France. So in addition to the global benefits that the Amazon forests provide, the Amazon is home to amazing wildlife like the jaguar, the largest cat in the Americas, and dozens of species of primates like this adorable squirrel monkey, the world's only nocturnal monkey, the owl monkey, and the world's smallest monkey, the pygmy marmoset. And then there's this giant river otter who at 6 feet long and up to 70 pounds is truly a fearsome predator. They can eat about 9 pounds of fish per day. And of course, there are literally thousands of species of birds, such as these gorgeous scarlet macaws and this wonderful blue and yellow macaw. The Amazon's also the largest river basin in the world and contains 15 to 20% of the free-flowing fresh water on Earth. It flows 4,000 miles from its source in the high Andes of Peru all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, and no bridge crosses it. It's navigable 2,000 miles upstream by ocean-going vessels. The annual discharge of water from the Amazon is 10 times greater than that from the Mississippi River. And the freshwater systems of the Amazon contain more species of fish than anywhere else. The cycle of rising water and falling water due to the rains is one of the most dynamic hydrological systems in the world and plays a large role in maintaining ecosystems like seasonally flooded forests and freshwater lakes that provide home for many species, such as the Arapaima gigas, which is the world's largest scaled fish, known in Brazil as the pirarucu and Peru as paiche. And of course, the Amazon river dolphin, also known as the pink dolphin. And although most people think of the Amazon as a vast wilderness, the Amazon is home to about 34 million people. Many of them live in large cities like Manaus and Belém in Brazil and Iquitos in Peru, but many indigenous and traditional peoples still make their living from harvesting natural resources like rubber, Brazil nuts, and fish. So my personal journey in the Amazon began when I was 20 years old in 1982, and I traveled to Manu National Park in the Peruvian Amazon to start my doctoral field research on spider monkeys, as Andrew mentioned. I was working at Princeton's Cochacashu Biological Station, 3 days from an appendectomy, as my future husband and then field assistant referred to it. I ended every day in awe of the forest. The monkeys dripped from the trees, a family of giant otters lived in the lake, and tapir tracks crisscrossed the beach after every rain. And the spider monkeys were great. Species like spider monkeys that were considered rare in other parts of the Amazon were abundant at Cochacashu. And one night over a dinner of rice and beans, a seasoned researcher who had worked throughout the tropics told me, there are very few places left in the world like this. You don't know how lucky you are to be working here. 8 years later, my dissertation on spider monkeys complete, I was working as a young program officer at World Wildlife Fund, and I finally appreciated the wisdom of my colleague. Many countries that I visited had designated protected areas to safeguard the natural resources on which local people and species depended, but they couldn't afford to staff them and maintain them, which left them vulnerable to illegal logging or poaching that degraded or destroyed the very resources the parks were meant to protect. Paper parks, which are protected areas that exist more on paper than in reality due to limited funding, were an unfortunate reality that I saw all the time. Spider monkeys were rare and not easily seen in many of the parks I visited. Then in 1999, WWF challenged every country in the world to protect 10% of its forests, and Brazil responded with an enthusiastic yes. This photo shows the then president of WWF International, Claude Martin, with the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, and his Minister of Environment. The Amazon Region Protected Areas Program, or ARPA, was created to embody that commitment. Since then, ARPA has become a formidable partnership of public and private partners, including Brazil's Environment Ministry, the German government, the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility, the Brazilian Biodiversity Fund, and WWF. The challenge was enormous, but over the next 10 years, the Brazilian government more than tripled its protected area system in the Amazon, creating 24 million hectares, an area about the size of Oregon, and making dozens of existing paper parks real. This map shows the extent of Brazil's Amazon protected area system in the year 2000, before ARPA began. And this is what it looks like today. The pink areas are the areas that are supported directly by ARPA. ARPA is the largest tropical forest conservation initiative ever. ARPA provides funding for boats and motors and the development of management plans and a host of other things that protected area managers like Gilmar Klein of the Brazilian Park Service, shown here, need to make sure that their parks are effective and protected. And ARPA played a really important role in Brazil being able to bring down deforestation by over 70% between 2004 and 2011. But coming up with the funds needed to sustain these protected areas was a real challenge. In 2011, my WWF colleagues and I estimated that the cost to maintain ARPA's protected areas would be $50 million annually, about twice what the Brazilian government was currently investing. But Brazil's economy had grown to be one of the largest in the world, meaning that donors were reluctant to provide grant funding to the country. So we had adapted an approach from the world of large project finance. We applied what we called a project finance for permanence, or PFP approach, that involves developing and agreeing on a set of ambitious conservation outcomes and donors pledging to contribute based on a detailed financial plan. No funding is handed over until the parties involved agree that all of the conditions necessary for success have been met. We created and capitalized a fund that would cover the costs of protected areas while the government of Brazil gradually increased its contribution to the point where they could take over full financial responsibility for the entire system. And disbursements from the funds are conditioned on Brazil meeting a series of agreed upon conditions, including providing appropriate staff and monitoring for the protected areas. So in May 2014, a little more than 3 years after we developed the financial plan, we launched a $215 million transition fund that will provide a bridge to full funding by the Brazilian government in 25 years. The fund has disbursed millions of dollars over the last 5 years to 117 different protected areas in the Brazilian Amazon, funds that are badly needed for protection and management. Shortly after we closed the deal, we thought, why not replicate ARPA for other Amazon countries, like Peru? This map shows the protected area, national system of protected areas in Peru, 83% of which is in the Amazon, including Manu National Park, where I started my conservation journey almost 40 years ago. And just a little over a year ago, on May 24th, 2019, the government of Peru, WWF, and our partners agreed to commit almost $140 million over the next 10 years to expand and effectively manage Peru's protected areas in the Amazon. The initiative is called Peru's Natural Legacy, and the agreement was signed by Lucia Ruiz, the Minister of Environment, shown here in the center, together with Carter Roberts, the CEO of WWF, and our other partners. Peru's Natural Legacy is the second of 3 PFP initiatives for the Amazon, with ARPA for Life in Brazil, Peru's Natural Legacy, and another PFP currently under development in Colombia called Heritage Colombia. These 3 initiatives combined will protect approximately 12% of the Amazon. And other Amazon countries also have comprehensive and representative protected area systems for their territories. So the good news is approximately 83% of the Amazon is still standing, and between protected areas and indigenous territories, almost half of it is under some kind of protection. But now for the bad news. Last summer, the world looked on horrified as the Amazon burned. When the fires were at their peak in August, there were thousands of individual fires, almost 3 times as many that month compared with the same period in the previous year. And the fire season in the Amazon this year is almost as bad as last year. The president of Brazil denies there is a problem. Thankfully, both this year and last year, international pressure, and in particular, the threat of boycotts in international markets for Brazil's agricultural exports forced the government to place moratorium on burning and to deploy the military to enforce that moratorium. But the fires are just a symptom of an even more serious problem, which is a big increase in deforestation. According to data from INPE, which is Brazil's satellite agency, over 10,000 square kilometers were cleared in 2019, making it the worst year since 2008 for Amazon deforestation. The fires last year in 2019 were a lagging indicator of deforestation that occurred months earlier. Deforestation has now increased in 5 of the past 7 years since bottoming out in 2012. And forest loss in 2020, unfortunately, is well ahead of last year's rate. So what's driving this increase in Brazil? Well, the policies of the current administration are hostile to environmental protections and specifically advocate for large-scale agricultural and mining development in the Amazon. The government has downgraded the importance of environment, climate change, and indigenous peoples' rights. The rhetoric of the president has led farmers, ranchers, and land speculators to feel they can deforest with impunity. And unfortunately, Brazil is not alone among the countries of the Amazon in seeing higher deforestation rates. Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia all have increasing rates. And so even though approximately 80% of the Amazon forest is still standing, we're approaching a level of deforestation that could endanger the sustainability of the entire Amazon ecosystem, a so-called tipping point, where a rainforest ecosystem flips to a dry forest or a savanna ecosystem. And now we have COVID-19. Latin America is an epicenter of the pandemic right now, and some of the worst affected regions within Brazil, Peru, and Colombia are in the Amazon. In addition to the tragic loss of human life, the repercussions on the economies of these countries will be severe. Governments will be focused on jumpstarting the economy, which is likely to put even more pressure on Amazon forests, especially if governments turn to large, poorly planned infrastructure works as a solution. There will also be more specific negative impacts on protected areas and the communities that surround them through the complete cessation of tourism. The shutdown of tourism in Peru, for example, will reduce park system revenues significantly this year due to the decline in park entry fees. This group shot is just from a couple of years ago on the Amazon River trip in Peru that you'll hear more about after my presentation. So where does that leave us? What is the future of the Amazon? Well, the challenge is really to develop a biodiversity economy with economic options and employment that doesn't require forest clearing for people living in the Amazon. Many of you may have eaten an acai bowl. Agroforestry systems for palm fruits like acai can generate up to $1,000 per hectare, whereas cattle is much lower, more like $100 per hectare. Brazil nuts and other products from the forests and rivers can be an important source of income for local people. Famous chefs in Lima are incorporating Amazonian fruits and nuts and fish into their cuisine. And we need to continue to focus on increasing the sustainability of protected area systems and empower Indigenous peoples to strengthen their territorial management. I'm working on a really exciting project right now with the Ururuwawa people in Rondonia to help them use technology like drones and satellite imagery to better patrol and protect their territory. Another challenge is to develop infrastructure the region needs in a way that doesn't unleash massive land speculation, deforestation, and river basin destruction. And we also need to work on increasing agricultural yields in regions outside the Amazon. To do this, we need to form partnerships with the private sector to drive positive change. Hundreds of companies have pledged to eliminate deforestation from their supply chains, and we need to hold those companies accountable for those pledges. The world also has to recognize that developing countries in the Amazon will need to be compensated for the opportunity costs of not clearing the forest. They will need to pay for the climate stability, water generation, and biodiversity that the Amazon provides. But I want to end on a story that illustrates the resilience of the Amazon. I was traveling on the Tapajos River and we saw something. Was it a caiman? No, maybe it was only a log, but it was swimming. We looked again and it turned and faced the boat and we realized it was a black jaguar. We looked on as awe as it approached our boat and swam past us and jumped out of the river and ran off into the forest, into the protected forest that was being supported by ARPA. In my 35 years working in the Amazon, I had never seen a black jaguar. It seemed like a sign of some kind. So yes, I'm hopeful even now that we can protect the Amazon and we have a future for the Amazon. I believe we can conserve it and leave a living Amazon for future generations. It won't be the Amazon I experienced back in 1982, probably not 3 days from an appendectomy, which is mostly a good thing. But there are ways to make sure that there is room for jaguars, the tapirs, the giant otters, and the spider monkeys, while providing for local, regional, and national development needs in the countries of the Amazon. So thank you for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer your questions now.
Meg, thank you so much for sharing your insights on this incredible place. We're going to turn to our questions now, submitted via the Google form, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. But Meg, before we get to our first question, I have a follow-up. You just mentioned in your closing that you still have hope for the Amazon. Why is that? What are the reasons that you're so hopeful?
Well, although the current situation is a little discouraging with the rising deforestation, the good news, as I mentioned, the Amazon is a relatively good news story compared to other tropical forest regions in the world, with almost 80% of the forest still standing and almost 50% of that under some kind of protection. So that's why I'm still hopeful. I also am hopeful because so many people care about the Amazon. It's an area that the world knows about and the world cares about. And I think that that's important in making sure that we all work together for its future conservation.
So you were talking in your presentation about the fire season in the Amazon, and we have a question from Gary who asks, how much of the biome has burned in this season, the latest fire season?
I don't know the exact number of hectares that have burned. It it is significant. It is, as I mentioned, a lot of the area that is burned is area that was already previously deforested. So what really concerns us are when some of the fires that are set to clear agricultural lands escape into the forests and then burn standing forest, burn primary forest. And we know that that's a relatively small amount still compared to the size of the Amazon. But what the rains will be starting now in October, and we will have the final figures on the extent of the burning probably within a month after the end of the season.
Great, thank you for that. Next question is from Christine. What can WWF do to discourage existing and planned highways in Peru, which bring gold mining, illegal logging, wildlife poaching, fires, and devastation to indigenous people and other ills?
It's a great question. So the Interoceanic Highway that goes from Brazil to Peru goes right around the border of Manu National Park, where I worked. And that highway has generated a lot of deforestation, as the listener is aware. What WWF is doing there is trying to consolidate land use among farmers and extractive communities that live around the road to make sure that they are settled there and don't expand further into the existing forest. There are also some ideas and plans for other additional roads, like the road that is supposed to go north of Manu in the Alto Purus region. And we are working very closely with the local communities there to, they're against the road. It's the local politicians that want the road for various reasons. And we're working very closely with the local communities to ensure that they can get the communication and the access to healthcare and schools that they need without a road. So whether we can use air taxis or boats on the rivers, anything to prevent the roads that, as the listener points out, are very destructive in terms of generating deforestation. We're also working on improving plans at a national level, helping national governments to plan infrastructure better, to put it in areas that isn't as destructive, so areas that are better for roads than, some areas are better for roads than others, just as some areas are better for dams than others.
All right, our next question is from Jeff. With the recent political events in the Amazon region and the deforestation consequences, can WWF and listeners do more to make conservation efforts more permanent there?
So the whole purpose of the Project Finance for Permanence projects I was talking about is to allow these efforts to continue in perpetuity and put up the revenue, generate new financial mechanisms that will generate revenues for protected areas, for indigenous territories over the long term. That is what our goal is with those projects. We want them to be able, these initiatives to be able to go across multiple government administrations. So no matter what the position of the current government may be, that they will keep going and keep supporting the conservation needs of the country through thick and thin, so to speak.
Another question from Carol this time, and you mentioned this earlier on in your presentation. Why do you think that Brazil rose to WWF's challenge to protect 10% of the forests? How did WWF help encourage that decision?
Oh, that's a great question. So this was part of what we called our Forest for Life campaign, where we challenged every government in the world to protect 10% of their forests. And there was a little bit of peer pressure and competition among the countries of the world. So once one country would announce that they had signed on to the pledge, it really generated some positive competition among the countries of the world. And Brazil, knowing that they had one of the largest pieces of forest in the world, I think they said, well, we can't let these other countries, make this pledge, so we're going to have to make the pledge. And we actually used our WWF network, our global network, very effectively to help them decide to make that pledge. So the ambassador in the UK, we used people in WWF UK to reach out to the Brazilian ambassador to the UK. And then we had WWF in Brazil reaching out to the Brazilian government. And we basically helped them. We said, if you make this pledge, WWF will help you to implement the pledge, and we'll help you get the resources you need to implement the pledge. And that was what ARPA was.
That's excellent. It's like the power of the panda to spur all of these countries competing with one another. All right, we have another question here from Linda, again about government policy. You say that government policy in Brazil is increasing logging there. What is the attitude of other governments in the region about increased logging? Do we have the same problems?
No, the increasing deforestation in countries other than Brazil, it's all very local context, right? So one of the reasons for the increased deforestation in Colombia is the end of the civil conflict there, which has made some lands accessible that were previously inaccessible due to being off limits due to the presence of the FARC. In Bolivia, there were some agricultural policies that explicitly were encouraging increased deforestation for cultivation of crops. So it's different in every country. And one of the things that WWF has learned is we need to work with every country where they're at and find out what those drivers are and help them to solve the problems that they're trying to solve in terms of whether it's increased income or jobs, to try to solve those problems without destroying the environment.
All right, we have another question from Jeff. He asks, what role do US companies have in the deforestation? And what is WWF doing to work with these companies to increase sustainability?
So WWF is very active working with companies in the US and that work in the countries of the Amazon to get them to take deforestation, remove deforestation from their supply chains. Two specific initiatives that I work with in Brazil are the Roundtable on Sustainable Soy and the Roundtable on Sustainable Beef. So we work with companies, bring them together through these roundtables to talk about best practices. And almost all, in terms of the Amazon, all of the companies have pledged to not have their supply chains negatively affect the Amazon. There's a current moratorium that soy buyers in Brazil will not buy from properties that have been deforested since 1986 or something like that, or 96. So those are the kinds of ways that we work with companies to get them to be able to produce without deforesting. That's what I meant when I mentioned increasing agricultural yields, for example, in areas outside the Amazon, using degraded lands that are already deforested for agricultural and reforestation projects is another way we work on that.
All right, we have a fun last question for you, Meg. And this is from Mark. He asks, what made you choose your dissertation topic? Why spider monkeys?
Spider monkeys are the best. They're very fun. They're a very fun monkey to watch. They actually are very, the reason why I chose them was because nobody had done a previous long-term study of spider monkeys. And people knew that they had had social behavior and ecology very similar to chimpanzees. So they're very smart. They travel long distances. They eat mostly fruit. And so it was really a challenge. It was more sort of a challenge to think, could I really be able to follow these wide-ranging, fast monkeys? And they were so entertaining that after one season of watching them, I was hooked. It was like my own mini soap opera every day.
It sounds like fun. I think we all love to get out and see some spider monkeys these days. Meg, thank you so much again for spending this time with us, for telling about your amazing work. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We had a great conversation, and that's going to do it for this part of our presentation. So thanks again, Meg. We really appreciate that you spent part of your day with us. So thank you all for joining this installment of the Insider Series. As we always do, we'll be following up with an email that includes a link to a recording of today's program. And it also has a link to a survey about your experience on the webinar. So please be honest with us, and we do review the comments so that we can improve where we can. And of course, we also hope that you will share the video when it's available with your family and friends. And as a reminder, if you're interested in the November 2021 trip to the Amazon, please stay on after this short video to get more information from Dr. Court Whalen of Natural Habitat Adventures. And Meg will also be staying on to answer some questions as well. I have had the good fortune of going to this region in the Amazon. I went there 10 years ago as a young WWF staffer, and I can say without question that it is a truly amazing experience. But before we get to that part and before we roll our video, I just have a couple quick announcements. First, the next installment of the WWF Insider Series will be on November 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We are skipping our bi-weekly episode on November 5th due to the US election, as we expect much of the world will be laser focused on the events of that week. For November 19th, we are planning a special episode as a thank you to our supporters, highlighting 4 of our biggest conservation stories from 2020. Second, there is another virtual event before that on November 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern. WWF's Pete Pearson, who was the featured expert on the June 11th edition of this Insider Series, will be speaking about our Food Waste Warrior curriculum, which was created to help teachers and students connect the dots between food systems and conservation. So you can join WWF and the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to learn some of the tools and strategies to reduce food waste in your school or classroom or in your own kitchen at home. Details on both of these events will be coming soon, so please keep checking your inbox for information. You can also visit wwf.events.org for details on the Insider Series, including future events. And if you really want to spend some time learning, you can watch all of our past recordings there too. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon. For all of you, for being there, for your commitment to conservation, to WWF. We do hope that you'll stay on for our Amazon trip info session, but if not, we will see you next time. Now for our short video, and the next face you'll see on screen after the video is Court Whalen from Natural Habitat Adventures. Thanks, everyone.
Your passion and generosity are helping build a more resilient future for nature and people. And while we are all staying home and staying safe, your commitment is still helping to make conservation progress happen all over the world. From the U.S. Northern Great Plains to the Arctic, from the Eastern Himalayas to the savannas of Africa, your commitment fuels work that safeguards local communities, iconic wildlife, and vast land and waterscapes. Together, we're developing innovative solutions to ensure the health of our planet.
Your support is helping to take us to a whole new level in our work.
Support that people like you have provided has achieved so much.
Thank you for your generous support.
Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you for your support.
We can't do the work that we do alone.
We're doing all of this great work at WWF. We have all of these amazing supporters out there. And it is really nice to be able to connect with the people that enable us to do this work.
Greetings, folks. Welcome to part 2 of today's presentation. Welcome from Boulder, Colorado, a very cold Boulder, Colorado, where my home's at. We're getting down to 8 degrees Fahrenheit in just a couple days. So I've been thinking about the Amazon quite a bit lately, and really all the tropics for that matter. So again, my name is Court Whalen. I head up our sustainability programs here, like making sure that we are a carbon neutral travel company. I'm also an expedition leader. So I gotta say, Meg, seeing your video of the black jaguar swimming has gotten me to be the most jealous I've been in months. And it also underlines a really, really great point, is that you can have lived in the Amazon. You can have lived in places in the world. Every time you go back to these areas, you see something new and something different. So we're, of course, very, very much looking forward to getting those folks interested to the Amazon, because we never know what we're going to see. We have an idea of, the old faithfuls, so to speak, but there's always something fascinating lurking out there. So today, I just have a few minutes. I want to go over a few slides, talk about what the expedition entails, the adventure that is before us. And we're also going to do a Q&A just like we did for the other presentations. So if you do have questions for me, just in a few short moments, I will be answering those. So I wanted to start this presentation with, of course, a photo of our base camp, so to speak. Not too shabby of a base camp. I have a feeling it probably beats the field station that you might have been at, Meg. Trust me, I've been at plenty of those field stations myself, and they're great, but this is quite a nice way to see the Peruvian Amazon. So I wanted to start with this photo, of course, but really when I think of an expedition to the Amazon, the adventure before us, it's really a little bit more like this. It's the boat's great, the base camp's great, it's the vehicle that gets us out there, but it's this feeling of immersion that really is it's what makes my heart pitter patter, and it's gonna wanna make you get there as well. Well, of course, everything that Meg was talking about probably has sort of whet your appetite, so to speak. But when I think of what we're going to be doing in the Amazon as part of an ecotourism expedition, it's this kind of stuff. It's being on the smaller skiffs, getting deeper into the tributaries, watching the wildlife, all that fantastic stuff. I also want to take a very, very short aside and kind of start with why. Why are travel and conservation so intertwined? Well, there's the obvious case that, you as supporters and friends of World Wildlife Fund, we'd love to get you out there and see the stuff that you're passionate about, see the stuff that you maybe have supported over the years. But really, there's something bigger, deeper going on here, is that what ecotourism and conservation travel, as we now call it, does is it adds value to these ecosystems. Fortunately or unfortunately, all these places around the world, they do have some sort of value. Of course, in places they might have value for the trees and the timber. It might have value for the arable land that can turn into agriculture and turn into cow pastures. There are other areas that are valuable for mining or what have you. These are kind of like the extractive processes. These are the things that we don't necessarily want everything to be converted into. So what we're finding, fortunately, now that conservation travel has such a big academic component, and World Wildlife Fund is very, very involved in that, is we're finding that sustainable tourism, this idea of conservation travel, actually adds more value to the trees, more value to the land, more value to the freshwater than anything else out there. Several times, anywhere from 5 to, in some cases, 500 times the value of things like poaching, deforestation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's this really interesting, semi-abstract, but very comforting thought that your vacation in a place like this can actually be one of the very best ways to save it. So it's a very fascinating thing. It's what's basically my life and work has been with conservation travel. So once again, getting back to this slide, this is what the Amazon's all about. This is what an adventure to the Amazon is really all about. It's about seeing the wildlife. And if I listed all the wildlife that you're likely to see, we'd be here for another couple hours. Maybe you would enjoy it, but we only have a few minutes here. So it's talking about the things in the trees, the massive tree iguanas. It's talking about the extraordinary sloths and other things that are found, that are arboreal critters, both day and night. The bird life, as you can imagine, in a tropical rainforest, this vast, this diverse, is extraordinary. It's not just the familiar things like the macaws, but the various species of toucans. Everything big and small is quite extraordinary too. And of course, oftentimes it's the primates, of which there are over a couple of dozen species of primates that we're likely to see and encounter on an expedition like this that is just a little over a week long. It's really, really extraordinary. So as I progress here, let's talk about quickly the itinerary. There's gonna be a lot more information online. I'm gonna share my personal email address after this. You're welcome to call me, contact me, and we'll talk more about the trip. But basically, the long and the short is it's a 9-day trip. It starts off by flying into Lima, many, many flights from around the US and North America daily. We do one quick overnight near the airport. We have a welcome dinner. We meet our fellow expedition and adventure mates. We meet Meg and Kurt and others from World Wildlife Fund that will be joining us from start to finish. You'll meet your Natural Habitat Adventures expedition leaders. These are the local folks that will be tracking and guiding you throughout the jungles each and every day. And then we fly short couple-hour flight to Iquitos, kind of the heart of this Amazonia region of Peru. And then just a few short minutes or hours later, we are on our riverboat. We are exploring the tributaries and the mighty Amazon itself, looking for all sorts of things from gorgeous landscapes to extraordinary wildlife. And like I said, if I were to go through day by day, it gets quite lengthy from there. But let me just quickly go over, what a typical day is like in the life of an Amazon adventure. And I use the word adventure because that's indeed it. It's part of the unknowns, it's part of the exploration. But let me tell you, anybody on this call is more than welcome to join. You do not have to have spent 27 months in the Amazon to be fit for this adventure. As you can tell from this very, very comfortable riverboat, it is meant to get supporters just like you out to see the projects that are most important. So a typical day, waking up shortly after sunrise, usually a light breakfast, and then we're out in the skiffs exploring the waterways. We're looking for wildlife, sort of that earlier morning wildlife. And we're out there for a little bit, and we're coming back for more of a full breakfast, more of a brunch. We're having a little midday siesta. We might have some presentations from Meg, from Kurt, from others. And then we're back exploring on these metal skiffs, maybe taking a short little hike on one of the boardwalks near some of the villages. And then sometimes we'll even stay out or go out another time to do some exploration around that crepuscular time of day or that just before nightfall to see what sort of semi-nocturnal critters we might be able to find. So typically the day is spent exploring via small metal boat. We do a couple hikes, very easy hikes over the course of the trip, but it's very immersive and we stay busy. So when I see the word cruise in sort of like the headline of a trip and adventure like this, it's not anything like a typical cruise you might be thinking about. So just keep that in mind. It is a wonderful, wonderful adventure. But again, because this is our base camp, I want to quickly go over and show a few slides of what you're likely to encounter on board, the onboard life of the Delphine, as it's called. It has 14 staterooms. We're taking no more than 24 guests on this trip. We do have a number of guests booked already, and actually some of you may be on this call. So if that's the case, welcome to the adventure. But we have some space available, and that's, of course, we would love to cordially invite you onto this trip. As you can see here, the accommodations aren't too bad. Amazing open air breezeways, amazing dining options. The staterooms all have extraordinary panoramic windows. It's really, really quite good. But again, when we talk about our definition of luxury, first and foremost, it's getting further out there than the rest. It's getting more immersive into the environment than the rest, all with extraordinary creature comforts of home. And we definitely deliver that with this wonderful, wonderful boat. Moving on here. So as we kind of go to the next couple of slides, the final couple of slides, I just want to emphasize this immersive experience. What we're doing is we're getting out there in the waterways, we're seeing the wildlife, and probably most importantly, something I haven't hit on quite enough yet is the amount of information you're going to take home with you. Being with folks like Meg, with Kurt, who's a country director for for Peru. It's such a great experience to learn from the people that know it best, some of the people that have set aside these reserves that we're going to be in. It's really quite a treat, let me tell you. For those that do wish to get out there a little bit more, you don't certainly have to do this. There's plenty of stuff to do on board as we have presentations and discussions throughout the days. We do have a small fleet of kayaks on this boat. So if you're the kind of person that loves to hear nothing but the sound of splash in the water as you cruise silently through the calm river, what an extraordinary way to see wildlife from the water's edge, maybe one of the giant river otters, maybe one of the Pic River dolphins, or looking for birds and sloths in the trees, iguanas, you name it. So this is another really interesting component to this type of adventure, is the ability to get on these little river kayaks and comb and explore on your own with our naturalist guides. So that's going to do it for me. I want to leave this slide up as we do the Q&A because this has some of the nitty gritty. I want to stress that if you have any questions that don't get answered here in the next section, I would love to connect with you personally. You can do so either by calling the number there, the 888 number, and that will get directed to me, or my email address directly is courtw@nathab.com. We are going to have a really, really extraordinary trip. And like I said, we have, I think, about a half a dozen spots still open in those 24 spots on the expedition, in addition to our expedition leaders and the World Wildlife Fund folks like Meg, like Kurt, and others. So that was a quick tour de force of what's going on. If you want to see what's happening with World Wildlife Fund work out there, this is one of the best ways to do it in comfort and just having a great week with us in the Peruvian Amazon. So again, if you have questions, feel free to dial those in. I'm just going to look at what has already come through. I see some. Let's see. So one of the first questions is, what is the weather like at this time of year? That's a great question. So November, we're looking at this expedition. Real quickly, in the Amazon, in tropical regions, you don't get as much seasonality in temperate air as you would in temperate areas or Arctic areas. The day lengths are pretty static. The temperatures are pretty static. You do have different rain patterns. You have the rainy season and then the rainier season. Just a little joke there. But that all being said, we are going in the dry time, but the chance of getting rain, once or twice on a trip, maybe a quick thunder shower or a little rain that moves through, we might get wet once or twice, but it's certainly not going to keep us from the adventures. But it's not like the really, really wet time of year that might be in, say, February or March. We do go during specific times to maximize the wildlife sightings and maximize your enjoyment, because if it is raining all day, every day, you can't get out there and enjoy. So we certainly know that going into it. Let's see. The next question is, let's see. I see that how many people go out on each skiff, and can one go out at night? Yes. So we have several skiffs. We limit the skiff size to about 8 people. That way you have an entire side to yourself. What we really try to do across our adventures around the world is make sure people are not crammed into buses or large boats, and everybody has the room with a camera to swing around, binoculars to view around. So we really prioritize that great guide to guest ratio. So we have several skiffs that do go out for our entire group, and not everyone might go out at the same time only by choice. So we do have a maximum of 8 in the skiffs at any one time. I see there's a bit of a follow-up to that one. Can one, let's see, kayak and canoe as well? Absolutely, you got that one. And can you go out at night in a kayak? Probably not in a kayak. I know a guy, so maybe I'll pull some strings for you. But night in the skiffs, absolutely doable. Mainly it's a safety thing. But again, maybe we'll work on pulling some strings if you're an avid kayaker, certainly. Let's see. I'm seeing a couple other questions. Do you anticipate that this trip will be offered again in 2022? For these VIP trips, we do have a select number of trips that we do when we invite folks like Meg and Kurt and other World Wildlife Fund staffers to be on the trip to add that next level of interpretation, the next level of information. We will not be doing an exact repeat of this in 2022. That all being said, the best way to keep these on your radar is to be on my radar. So shoot me a quick email. I'll keep you in touch with what selection of trips we're offering, because we do offer a handful of trips. It just may not be to Peru each and every year. It may be to Uganda for gorillas, and maybe to Brazil for the Pantanal and jaguars. But yeah, let's just keep in touch on that one, certainly. And a great question here, kind of follow up to that. And this one's for Meg. I believe she's still on the call. Meg, what sort of World Wildlife Fund work is the group likely to experience along the way?
So, wow, that was a great presentation, Court. If I weren't already signed up, I'd be signing up now. So we'll be right in the middle of one of the protected areas, Pacaya-Samiria National Reserve, that WWF is working with the government of Peru and with the local communities to increase its degree of protection and its management. So we'll have opportunities to talk with the local community members who we're supporting to work on natural resource management issues. We'll probably have the opportunity to talk to either the protected area manager or the rangers that are working there about the work that WWF has been supporting for Pacaya-Samiria. So WWF's been working in this region for many years, and we'll see lots of WWF impact.
Fantastic. And I think one of the best things is that the unprecedented access to folks like Meg and Kurt and others during the course of the entire trip. I find being a guide on these trips, sometimes the best conversation, the most interesting nugget of information that you take home with you is during a quote unquote fireside chat. Maybe we're talking before dinner, maybe we're talking on the skiffs as we're motoring out to one of the villages that we'll see. And just having folks that are as knowledgeable in the area as Meg and Kurt and others is it's really extraordinary. So yeah, from start to finish. Fantastic. Let's see. We've got a lot of great questions here, folks. I love this. Let's see. I see the next question is, are there opportunities to support the region through shopping or donations, et cetera, et cetera? Great question. We do aim to visit at least one local village, usually a couple local villages over the course of the time. These are very opportunistic. Oftentimes we have connections with various villages in the area. We don't visit them each and every trip, so we kind of stagger it to spread the wealth, so to speak. I can say almost assuredly, then yes, you will be able to visit the villages. And oftentimes they will have, it's rather authentic. So it's not like they have a set up shop necessarily. Some villages do, some villages don't. But regardless, we know that artifacts and artisans and crafts and things like that, we will certainly have an opportunity to do so. But again, I think it kind of goes back to what I said before. One of the greatest ways that tourism and conservation intertwine is just by being there. The tourism dollars that we are leaving by working with the boat, by working with the local folks that work on the boat, by sponsoring the villages that we visit, paying sort of visitation fees and realizing that they are part of the tourism equation, that goes such a long, long way. So it's really a fantastic thing just by being on the trip. And I see it might be the same person, Claire, the kayaks. Oh, Claire, hi. Our kayaks, they have staff or guides on them. Yes, so they can. Sometimes people like to go on their own. Sometimes people like to go on with a guide or a staff. So we can do that with our tandem kayaks. It just depends on the person and their preferences. But yeah, absolutely. We won't just shove you off in an inner tube in the middle of the Amazon River, unless you really want to. You got to pay extra for that option. That's an extra. Kidding, of course. So I see one that I definitely want to get here, and this is kind of an elephant in the room, is COVID. What happens if COVID is still bad in the region? What if it's still bad in the world? We are really hoping in 14 months from now or 13 months from now that that's not the case. We actually did have a trip to the Amazon scheduled this year a month ago. We did postpone that. So being firmly in the travel industry, we have our eyes and ears and fingers in the button. We know what's going on. And yes, if there are any issues, we are hyper responsible with that. If we need to, we will postpone the trip. Of course, we are really hoping that the trip runs, but we're doing so cautiously. We can't totally put our lives on hold for the next several years. So we are planning, we are putting things out there. But of those select few trips that we have even running later this year to more domestic locales like Yellowstone National Park, we've already gotten way ahead of the curve in various COVID protocols. So again, I would love to chat with you more on that, but I do want to let you know that we 100% have our sights on that, and we won't leave anyone out to dry if that's something that still is prevalent in 14 months from now. Certainly. Let's see. Gosh, lots of great questions here. I think there's a question about the cost of the trip. Maybe if we could put that last slide up here, because I think I'm getting to maybe one of my last questions here. You'll see the details of the dates and price here. We're looking at $74.10 per person for the trip. And that's, I hate to use the word all inclusive because that reminds me of like a resort in Jamaica or something. But these trips, although they are adventures and expeditions, that everything's covered from start to finish. Really, the only thing that you got to think about, and we will help you with it, but it's just your international airfare to get down to the starting point of the trip in Lima. But we have a full flight team in house, and we're always happy to help with those things. I think maybe one of the last questions I have here. If I scroll up, I see even more questions. Let me quickly touch on before, this is my penultimate question we'll ask about ages. What's the youngest age? Typically for this trip, we would welcome younger folks. I will say just in general, we don't get a lot of younger folks on trips. I think because of the depth of knowledge that we're going into, we are with folks that like to hear lectures and discussions. It is a bit of almost like a floating classroom, so to speak, a very experiential classroom, of course. We're getting out there and seeing the stuff we're literally learning about, but we typically don't get folks younger than 16 on these Amazon trips. I think just because of the nature of the boat and the type of excursions. But again, if you have questions specific to that, go ahead and ask those to me separately later on. And then another question on numbers, can you travel solo? Yes, you absolutely can. We can either have you as a solo traveler and you can have your own room, or we can match you with another solo traveler of the same gender, and we can work that way. So yeah, we encourage anyone and everyone to sign up. But again, hit me up for more questions later on that if you have specifics. The last question, which I think I might, we'll do a joint answer, me and Meg, is what species do you typically encounter sea? And I love that this person, Jeff, said, obviously no guarantees. Thank you for understanding. This is nature. This is wildlife. We certainly wouldn't want to control anything. But I do guarantee at least 3 black jaguar sightings. Yeah, I've just added that actually when I saw Meg's jaguar video. We're going to have 3 of those. No, so it is a lot. You know, there is a lot of opportunities. The number of primate encounters, you know, the monkey species could be extraordinary. We often see several different species at different times of day in different sizes of, you know, solos, gregarious, troops, et cetera, et cetera. The reptiles and amphibians are very, very good. The bird life is extraordinary, all the way from some of the smaller stuff that could be just wildly ornate and colorful, all the way to the big things like the macaws that are just going to make a racket in the trees, and you can't help but turn your head when you see a flock of macaws flying over. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and of course sloths are always a highlight. Meg, what kind of things are you looking? Maybe what are you looking forward to? What are we likely to see?
Well, of course, the monkeys are my favorite too. So we'll definitely, well, I can't say definitely, but we'll see squirrel monkeys and capuchin monkeys probably, as well as I was on this trip quite a few years ago, and I was thrilled to see a saki monkey, which they're difficult to see in other parts of the Amazon. So that was lots of fun. And then in terms of the birds, you mentioned the macaws, but there's always that, the Watsons. We will see lots of Watsons, which is this extremely interesting, very primitive bird that looks sort of like a chicken with a bad hair day.
Absolutely. Love it. And a couple of things I totally forgot of: giant river otters, very good chance of seeing that. And this is not an animal, but the giant lilies are actually pretty fantastic in terms of seeing things that you're not going to see anywhere else in the world. The Amazon is quite replete with that. But also pink river dolphins are something that we're likely or hopeful to encounter. When it comes to, so the elephant in the room on wildlife, when it comes to the big cats, we are hopeful. We are very, very hopeful. I was, of course, kidding about the 3 black jaguars. We have seen them down there. We are probably a bit more likely to see some of the smaller cats, but we certainly do keep an eye out for things like ocelots and some of the tigrillos and some of the other smaller things. They are equally exciting. Tapirs are another big one. Depending on the season, depending on the year, they can be seen a little bit more than jaguars and some of the big cats. Sometimes they're a little bit more rare, but I think kind of going back to each and every trip is different. Each and every time you're going to see hundreds of species of birds. You're going to see, you know, up to a dozen species of these primates. Which ones exactly? You've got the denizens, you've got the ones that are highly likely, but then there's always just something that's fantastic. Oh, and then I'm seeing a couple comments here. Capybara, possibly. You know, some of the smaller,
for sure.
goodies and paca and some of the smaller, you know, jaguar food, if I can say that. But yeah, it's a wildlife trip. But then, you know, if I were to kind of end with one thing, I'd say, you know, gosh, just the immersion into one of the world's oldest, largest rainforests is a feeling. It's a feeling like you wouldn't believe. So it's hard to say that the wildlife is a cherry on top, because it's a huge cherry on top. It's hundreds of cherries on top. But there's something about just your sense of place in this massive primordial part of our world that so few people get to see, and so people get to see in the way we're seeing it, that I think really makes this trip just beyond extraordinary. Well, cool, guys. Well, thank you so much. Again, if I didn't get to your question, please do give me a buzz, give me an email. Gosh, looking forward to next time, and maybe looking forward to having you on this Amazon adventure. Meg, thank you so much for the presentation. We're going to go ahead and sign off from here. I don't think there are any other presenters today. So once again, thanks, folks. And thanks for all you do as supporters of World Wildlife Fund.